Welcome back to the Unstuck movement. I am your host, Rob Z. Today, as every day with the Unstuck movement, we break chains that have been holding you back in your life personally and professionally. And today, we're talking with Chad Hufford. We're going to dive into topics on faith, finances, stewardship, your habits, and your legacy. And Chad, I'd like to dive into a powerful question right off the bat to get the ball rolling. Love to give value to our audience. This is the question I want from you today. What is the number one habit that leads to long-term financial stability?
So, Rob, this is going to be so simple that some of your listeners are going to be like, well, I already knew this. But the problem is everybody knows it, but nobody's doing it. It is simply living beneath your means. Morgan Housel says you have to have an ego that is lower than your income. And so many people, doesn't matter how much money they make, are still living paycheck to paycheck. There's no margin. They've got maxed out credit cards, maxed out budgets, maybe even maxed out waistlines, and they're pushing everything to the limit. And there's no room to be generous. There's no room to pay the future version of themselves, and creates a lot of scarcity and anxiety.
Yeah, and then it just keeps increasing as the income increases, the spending increases, the lack of time and space increases. Are you speaking from personal experience?
Obviously I've gone through my season of that. And I think it's one of those things we can read about and we can say like, oh yeah, it's lifestyle creep or whatever the thing is that causes people's budgets to grow faster than their income does. We tell people budget's like a goldfish. It will grow to whatever size container you put it in. So, I talk to physicians and executives who make several $100,000, maybe even seven figures a year, living paycheck to paycheck. We also have blue collar millionaires we work with that never made $100,000 a year and are multimillionaires. So we see both extremes, but it is all around us. And very few people have a margin between what they actually take home and what they consume. And that's the thing, is we're in a consumption society. We're not just chasing wealth anymore. We're chasing comfort and consumption, and it's getting a lot of us in trouble.
And we're also chasing comparison too, right? It's like we're comparing ourselves to so many different people, and people online look, and I'm not saying the people online who are advertising themselves as successful aren't successful and wealthy, but it's this comparison trap of like, man, I need to be that because they are that, not because of anything that I'm doing myself.
No, I think human beings, we've probably always done that, but you're absolutely right. With social media and the internet, we can now, it's not keeping up with the Joneses isn't just the people on our street anymore. It's everybody and anybody across the world. And we're comparing our average day to somebody's best moment. And here's where, going back to consumption, I think human beings have always chased wealth. And it's always been one of those things that can steer us off course and get us in trouble. But here right now in our society, Rob, we're not even chasing wealth anymore. We are chasing consumption, because what we see on TikTok and Instagram, the fancy cars, the nice vacations, the expensive clothes and handbags, that's not wealth. That's actually the spending of wealth. It is the consumption of wealth, not wealth itself. We see that. We don't know if that person actually is financially well off. All we know is since they bought that $5,000 handbag, they have $5,000 less than they did before. And they could be drowning in debt, and they could be just as freaked out about money as us. But we're starting to go beyond just chasing wealth and chasing this more trap. It's just consuming of more and more and more. And like you said, it's all around us.
Yeah, man, that's so good. Okay, I'm excited to dive into more of this. Before we go there, though, I just want to welcome everybody here to the Unstuck movement. These are true testimonies of breakthrough. I bring people on this podcast who have had incredible breakthrough in their lives to give you an example that it's possible for you personally and professionally. We're sponsored by the Connected Leaders Academy. Check out connectedleadersacademy.com. And also, if you want to become the authority in your space, maybe you're an expert at what you do, but you want to be the go-to authority. You want to leave a lasting impact on people's lives with what you do and what you have to share. And you want to make incredible connections for yourself personally and professionally. I encourage you, if you don't have a podcast, to launch one. And that's what I love to help people do with our Pro Podcaster Academy. You can join the wait list at robzwentz.com. Chad Hufford is a best-selling author, elite wealth coach, and the founder of Veritas Wealth Management, managing $500 million in assets with a background in biochemistry, athletic training, and financial planning. He teaches people to align their mindset, habits, and finances to live a life of abundance. And as you were just saying what you were saying there a couple of minutes ago about the ego, when it comes to spending and spending inside your means, how do you keep that financial ego in check for yourself?
Well, I think one of the things is just really looking at what is important. Like, what is really critical in my life? What brings me value and joy? Because so often, going back to what you said about social media and comparison, we end up chasing what we think is important to other people rather than what is deeply meaningful to us. And we end up dancing to somebody else's music and wonder why we keep tripping over ourselves. So it's really getting down to the core of who we are. You had a guest on your show recently that talked about mindfulness and really being still, and we don't do that enough. So the tendency is just, we see things out there that other people are going after, and if we don't know what we need to go after, then we just chase what everybody else is chasing. It's kind of that herd mentality without ever pausing to think of, is this really something that is worth having? Is it worth sacrificing for? So I think it's being centered and understanding what brings me value and joy. What is important to my family? What are my priorities? If everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. The other thing that I do every morning is I write a gratitude list. And sometimes it's really simple, basic stuff. Sometimes it's big stuff. Sometimes it's really profound. And sometimes it's really not profound. But here's what gratitude does, Rob, is we live in a world of everybody chasing what they don't have. And gratitude reminds you of the blessings that are already in your life, the things that you already have obtained or that you're already benefiting from. So you're more focused on what you do have, less focus on what you don't have.
I love doing this show and themes come up. And today you're the second guest I'm having on today, Gina Marie. I just talked to her a little bit ago, and the same theme, man, the same thing. Waking up in the morning, writing down 3 things you're grateful for. She brought that up in that episode, and now you're bringing it up again. And it's reminding me, that's something that I used to do that I haven't done in a couple of years. And it's like, okay, so I get the message. I got to get back to doing that again because it's so powerful. It's so easy to get distracted and fall off course of why am I doing what I'm doing? And to be grateful for the things you already have, like simple things like turning on a water faucet and water comes out. Like it can be that simple. Your heart's beating. I don't know how that's happening. What an incredible gift. Like so simple to be grateful for those things, but we can lose track of those so easily. As we were getting ready for this episode, I always ask guests for their favorite quote. And you gave me, to whom much is given, much is expected. I would love to know, what is it about that quote that you love, and how does that apply to your life, or how do you apply that to your life?
Well, for me personally, that means a lot because I had a moment years and years ago where my life should have ended and it didn't. So I'm living every day trying to see it as a gift from God, and also looking at how I live that day as my gift back to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not raised like a lot of folks. I mean, I was raised in a house where both parents loved me. They weren't perfect, but we talked about money, and people think, oh, well, what's important about that? Well, for a lot of folks, money is something that only comes up when it's under stress, like when there's not enough of it, when somebody makes a mistake. And we learn to have a very bad relationship with money. And people go 2 ways. Sometimes people chase it because they think that, well, more of that will solve their problems, and more money solves bad money relationships, like a bigger truck fixes bad driving. Like, you can't increase the thing you're having problems with and expect it to change your issue. You can't have more horsepower and expect that to solve your driving issues. Same thing with money. But I grew up in a house where money was talked about, and in a safe manner, and parents that loved me and poured into me, that introduced me to the Bible, to stewardship, and And I thought that was normal. I thought everybody talked about money at the dinner table. I thought everybody talked about ministry and serving others. And I've been given so much. And I realized that there's a lot of expect. I believe, Rob, I will stand before God to give an account of my life, not just what I did, but the things I didn't do, the opportunities that I neglected because I wanted to stay in a comfort zone. And I hope that list of things I didn't do that I should have is short. So that's a part of it. But the other part of it too is just looking at the world we're in. Like since the 1950s, the average middle class family has doubled their income, even accounting for inflation. So in real dollars, doubled their income. But unfortunately, our expectations or our needs, I'm using air quotes here for our listeners, have increased even faster than that. So we still experience scarcity. Even maybe you're not in the middle class. Maybe you're living poverty level in the United States. You still probably have a better standard of living than 4 to 5 billion other people on this globe right now. So I think everybody listening to this show, the fact that you have a smartphone, that you're listening to this podcast while you're driving in a car that has technology that didn't exist 10 years ago. Like, we all have been given so much. But back to your point about gratitude, I think too often we focus on what we think we're missing rather than the tools that we've already been given.
Yeah, man. So true. And when you look at our society being a consumerist kind of society, we are built to consume. We're well, not built to, but we're kind of programmed to just want to consume. And when you live like that, you live in lack instead of abundance. And like you said, man, when you really look at your life, just the fact that no matter at what level you're at in your life, if you have a cell phone in your hand, like just the just the astronomical benefits of having that phone have a smartphone in your hand, and the unlimited availability of everything that is on there, and the potential that you have just from that. I mean, it's really incredible. But we become we adopt things maybe a little bit slowly, but man, we adapt to them so fast and we get used to them, right? So it's like figuring out how to reset that for ourselves so that we can live at a more steady pace and to see things from a more grateful point of view. It's really, really important to do. And, I'm not going to say that I'm perfect at it by any means, but on a daily basis, I'm constantly trying to ground myself and reminding myself things are really, really good. And I actually have no idea how any of this works, and just be grateful for how it is all actually happening despite me, So I'm really curious too. You mentioned and touched on this just a little bit there, but facing your own mortality, how did that reshape your purpose in life? What happened that started to break down the walls of the way you thought things were and put them back together to the way things are now?
Well, so I was 19 years old, and I was living a life that I would just say was pretty selfish. It wasn't like, if you were looking at me from the outside, you wouldn't think anything of it. I was living probably like a lot of 19-year-olds. I was actually making some pretty good money, but it was all about me, and it was about serving me and what I wanted to do. And everything was very self-focused, and it was about what does Chad want, and what is next for Chad. And again, it wasn't doing anything crazy or extravagant, but I definitely wasn't thinking about a long-term future. I definitely wasn't thinking about serving others. And the quick version is carbon monoxide poisoning. So heat exchanger in my house cracked. I was going to school at the time, just started college, and my family, I was living at home still, and my family was all out of town. I had to stay back because I had finals the next week. So it's a week before my 20th birthday. The heat exchanger cracks, and I get home late. Notice the house is kind of cool. Don't think anything of it. I go to sleep. Just the last thing you want to be doing in the midst of a carbon monoxide exposure. And what carbon monoxide does, if people don't know, it essentially pushes oxygen off your hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is the protein inside your blood that carries oxygen to your various tissues. sorry, I have a degree in biochemistry, so I might nerd out a little bit on you, but it's a vehicle. Hemoglobin is the vehicle that carries oxygen around in your body. So if you think about what carbon dioxide does, is it hijacks the car. It forces oxygen out of that vehicle. So even though you're breathing air, your blood cannot carry oxygen to your tissues. So what typically happens is you're essentially asphyxiating even as you're breathing. And it's odorless, it's colorless, and I didn't know I was being exposed. And typically what happens is when people get to a certain point of toxicity, they fall asleep and they never wake up again. And I won't get into the gory details. It was a miserable, awful night, but I was exposed to levels that should have been fatal within 30, 60 minutes. I was exposed to them for almost 10 hours.
Wow.
And I kept waking up to get sick. And by the time the night was over, I was having convulsions, and it was just awful. But I would wake up and then go back to sleep. And because I had no idea what was going on. And at a certain point, I was even having trouble processing information. I mean, there's nothing left in my body. But I kept waking up, and that's what makes no sense. Even to this day, there's no medical reason for it. I do believe it was a miracle, and God was getting my attention. But I was angry. I went from going to the best shape of my life. In fact, I was training for a national bodybuilding competition at the time, and I was again back to the self-focus. Everything was going well, and I was actually one of the favorites in the junior division to do very well. And then this happened, and I lost 20 pounds in the course of a couple of days, and I had a hard time even getting up the stairs. So I went from going from best shape of my life to being almost completely helpless. And I would say I was angry with life. I was angry with God. And I wish I could say that it turned around real quick, but it didn't. But somewhere, maybe 6 months down the road, I realized, Chad, you're lucky to be alive, man. Like, you're complaining about how you feel. Cause I mean, I had headaches for months. I mean, it was a long recovery, but I was so focused on what I didn't have, what I thought I had lost. I was neglecting to look at the fact that should have been it for me. My ticket should have been punched at 19 years old. And here I am at 20 years old, and I'm bitter about that. Again, focusing on what I thought I had lost. And I realized that I could have very easily been standing before God, giving an account of my life, and it would have been a pretty shameful account. There was not much, with all the opportunity I've been given, there was not much I was doing for others. And I'll be honest, Rob, that was horrifying to me. Like, standing in front of my Creator and trembling because I had squandered the opportunities that I've been given. And I decided that's not how I'm living my life anymore. So every day, I've had almost 25 years since that moment of bonus time. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm working on it just like you are. I mean, it's the gratitude. I mean, that gets overwhelmed by frustrations, but every day I try to remind myself that this is another 24-hour period that I was not promised. It is a blessing. It is a gift. And how I live out the next 24 hours is my gift back to God.
I love that, man. And that's why God gives us days. You need a reset. We need a reset every day so we can submit ourselves again, because there's such a gift in having an opportunity every single day to submit yourself to God and to remind yourself of these things and to build those habits into your life. So I absolutely love that. And not that you went through that, but when we go through really difficult things, that's when God shows up in our life, and we can choose whether we move towards him or ignore him. But man, when things like that happen and you get that wake up call, and it's interesting too, right? Because at first you were frustrated and you were annoyed this was happening and you were kind of blaming life and blaming God. And you turn around and you're like, wait a minute, this is God reminding me of he saved you that night, and then continued to remind you after that. So I love stories like that, because I can be thick-headed. I need smacked upside the head. So God will smack me upside the head and be like, listen, man, I'm trying to wake you up, but I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep doing it until you get the message. And so when you get that message early, and I'm sure you had moments where you slipped from 19 or 20 on, right? There's stuff that happens, but you kept recommitting yourself to that practice of gratitude.
Yeah, every day is a blank canvas,
Yeah.
and we get to choose what we're gonna draw on there, and too often we bring the crap from a previous day or from our past onto that fresh canvas, and I'm guilty of that too. But and I think we can all be stubborn. It's human nature. And
Mhm.
in fact, I was teaching out of Deuteronomy the other day. Deuteronomy 1, it starts out with, so this is Moses. They're at the cusp of at the precipice of the promised land. The Israelites, they've been pulled out of Egypt. Everybody knows the story. But Moses is not allowed to go in. And in Deuteronomy 1, he talks about it's the 11-day journey from Kadesh to Mount Horeb. And we are in the 11th month of the 40th year of this journey. So you think about it like that, like it should have taken 11 days to
Yeah.
get the Israelites out of Egypt, but it took over 40 years to get Egypt out of the Israelites. And we're no different. We're slow learners. And I am glad that that event happened. I'm sad that it took something so extreme to get my attention, but that's what I needed. That was my wake up call. And having such an intimate exposure to death, I think, is something that is actually incredibly freeing because it
Mm.
gives us perspective. And I'm so glad it happened. There's a phrase in Latin called memento mori. And what that means is remember you will die. And when Roman generals would come back from victory and they would parade through the streets with their army behind them, they're thinking, they're the top dog, like they're the guy. They would actually have a servant riding with them, whispering that phrase over and over again, reminding them, memento mori, remember that you will die. Like this moment, this is awesome. You've earned it. This is great, but it will not last forever. You are a mortal being, and at some point, you're going to have to give an account. So that's just interesting historical tidbit. Memento mori, though. Remember, you will die. It sounds dark, but I actually think that there's a lot of freedom and perspective in it.
Yeah, it reminds you how to live when you remember that you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And two, also, I feel like with God and us humans, as we live our life, it's like our entire life is getting Egypt out of us as we prepare to pass on to go to heaven. It's like getting that Egypt out of us the entire time and reliving that cycle over and over again. It's really good to think about, and memento mori, to keep that on your mind. So real quick, we got to pause to shout out the sponsor of the podcast. When we come back, though, you talk about intellectual obesity. I want to talk about intellectual obesity. Why are we suffering from it? What does it mean? And what can we do about it? We'll talk about that in 60 seconds. Are you struggling to make consistent, valuable content for yourself? Do you want to have an efficient and effective way to create content that attracts the people that you want to connect with in life, the people you want to build relationships with in business? Do you want to be the go-to authority at what you do, at what you're great at? Would it be helpful for you if you had a platform that connects you to incredible people in your industry? The kind of platform that gets you leads and lands you clients without you having to beat down anybody's door or blow up anybody's inbox. Whether you're already creating content or you're desiring to start and it's something that's been kind of burning inside of you for a while, I urge you and encourage you to check out the Pro Podcaster Academy. Get started right now. Join the waitlist at robzwentz.com.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world globally. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, join the Connected Leaders Academy today. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JAESCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
Loving this conversation, Chad. Really, really good stuff, and excited to dive into the conversation about money, because that can be a conversation that's avoided. So I don't want to avoid that in this conversation we're having here today. You talk about intellectual obesity. What does that mean to you?
Well, we are in a society that has unparalleled access to information and data. And the problem, Rob, as you know, is that not all data is information, not all information is knowledge, and not all knowledge is wisdom. So how do we take all the data and information and condense it down into wisdom that we actually apply to our life? And that's where it gets important, is that if we have information, even if it's good information, if it's true knowledge, if it's not applied, what good is it? You may be a physicist and know all about gravity, the force impacts, the friction of air, and be able to calculate all these different things. But if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute, all that knowledge doesn't do you any good. You can know about the thing, but if you haven't applied your knowledge to put on the parachute because you know the force of gravity is so extreme, it's not going to do any good. You could study about working out. You could study about the oxygen exchange in your lungs and all the physiological properties, all those things. But if you just sit around the couch and don't do anything about that, knowledge benefits you nothing. So what I think of when I think of intellectual obesity, it is taking in information, maybe even really good information, things like this podcast, but you don't do anything with it. Mm-hmm. How has that improved your life? We I think struggle with intellectual obesity. We're consuming good things, and not everybody. I mean, some people are just consuming intellectual junk food. You know, the stuff on streaming services and TikTok, and I mean, there's a lot of garbage out there too. But even really, really good stuff. I see all the books behind you. A lot of those I recognize. But if I'm reading that, but it doesn't impact my life, I have to remind myself that education without execution is merely entertainment. And am I entertaining myself with these books, or am I actually changing who I am? And that's where we need to make sure that we have true wisdom, which is applied knowledge in our own life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I also tell people too, like if you're just starting out on the journey and you're just consuming information and you're getting that knowledge, that's a great place to start, right? To start having the practice of putting those things into your eyes and your ears and soaking it in. But if you don't ever start taking action on those things, if things don't actually physically start changing in your life, if you don't notice change and other people around you don't notice change, then what are you doing with that? And it's honestly like, in the Bible and Jesus talks about, we're given this light, and what do you do with a lamp? You don't hide it. You don't put it under a blanket and hide the light. Like, you put it on the top of the table for everybody to see so other people can see. So if you're going to be taking in all this good stuff, you need to apply it to your life so that you can also help other people in their lives so they can apply it to their life. And that trickle effect that comes from that clearly is the only way to effectively steward it. You were talking about the word stewardship before. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a word that outside of the Christian community almost never gets talked about. I don't know if I ever heard it outside of the Christian community. And stewardship, especially when it comes to money, is such an important thing. Can you talk about what that word means to you and how you apply that when it comes to your finances?
Well, a steward in the biblical sense was simply a manager. So, I mean, today we could look at, an employee versus employee-employer type relationship, but it was, you had responsibility to utilize something, an opportunity, a resource that wasn't yours, but you could benefit from how that resource was utilized. It could have been a tool, it could have been money, could have been all kinds of different things. But a steward, we are all stewards. We've all been entrusted with a great deal. We don't get a choice whether we're stewards or not. The only choice we get is whether we are an effective one. And I think a lot of us, myself included, it's easy to get distracted by everything around us and to miss the opportunities to be good stewards of what we've been given. We've been given different things. And there's a parable in Matthew 25 of the talents, where the master gives 5 talents to one individual, 2 talents to another, and 1 talent to the third. And I'm going to ask you, Rob, like, what do you envision when you hear that? Are you familiar with that parable?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you envision? Like, what does that scene look like to you? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, he's handing one person a talent, another 2. He's giving them responsibility. He's giving them something that they're going to have to watch after. They're going to have to use effectively. And if he's a good master, he's checking to see, okay, so who's going to use this the way that they're supposed to, and kind of using it as a measuring stick for where his servants are at and who's the best servant.
And I think what some people do is this false humility where they kind of devalue themselves. Like God just has, I'm just not that talented. I'm not a good speaker. I'm not that smart. I'm not whatever. And we give ourselves excuses for not acting. It's going back to that intellectual obesity. Like I don't have anything to give. I'm just going to sit here. And maybe we don't do the work of actually gaining knowledge, which you said. I mean, don't get me wrong. Knowledge is very important, but we belittle ourselves, and it's this toxic humility where we say we don't have enough to give. Here's how many wheelbarrows do you see in that scene? The parable of 20. None. Here's the problem with that parable. We read through that. We don't know what a talent is. A talent was not a coin. It was actually a unit of measure equal to 75 pounds. So that's why I say, where were the wheelbarrows in that scene? There weren't guys holding out their hands. They were pulling up wheelbarrows to accept the immense blessing that their master was giving them, a huge responsibility. So you think of a single talent. Maybe some of these people listening, I'm only a one talent Christian. God's not going to require much from me, and that's wrong. And this is where we miss the parable. A talent of gold in today's dollars is worth about $2.5 million. So even the servant who was entrusted with a single talent, and again, it wasn't necessarily fair. They each got different amounts, but it also said it was based on their previous stewardship, what they had shown. But even the servant that got a single talent was still blessed with an abundance, still blessed with a small fortune to be able to impact the lives of others. And what does he do? He buries it in the ground, not to store it, but to keep it, to hoard it from the master, from others. So yes, it takes risk when God gives us abilities and talents and resources. I'm taking way beyond money. Sometimes the hardest talents to use are our skills. It's the gifts that we've been given, but they require us to be vulnerable, to step out into the unknown and to try to serve others, because we don't know how those people are going to respond. And sometimes it's painful, but that's what God is requiring of us. And too many of us, we bury those things in the ground, and we stay inside of a comfort zone. So what stewardship means is taking risk. It's taking what your God-given gifts have been, material and immaterial gifts, and utilizing them to the best of your abilities to serve those around you and to give a gift back to God.
That's so good. And if I look back on my own life, I've recognized, like, why would I not want to be a leader in my life? Why would I not want to receive the gifts that God has given me in my life? Because I think unconsciously this was happening, but if I had to be like honest with myself, I was ignoring receiving those things, and I was kind of like putting myself down so that I wouldn't have to have the responsibility of using those gifts to bless other people, because that creates, like you said, vulnerability. You're putting yourself on the line, but you have these gifts and you have to serve other people with them. That's the whole point of having them, and to serve, the glory of God. So why do we skirt these things? Because then we don't have to claim responsibility. We don't have to be a leader in our own life, because we say, like, I'm not good enough, or I don't have good enough things about me to be able to be the kind of person that God would want to rely on, right? And so I'm just speaking from personal experience. I think a lot of us, we will ignore or bypass these things or downplay them just so we don't have to have the responsibility of them. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think we diminish our own capability to give us less responsibility for acting. And again, it goes back to that servant. He buried it in the ground. He chose comfort rather than impact, because he had been given enough. $2.5 million, 75 pounds of gold. Some people say, well, it was just talking about silver. Okay, so maybe it was only tens of thousands of dollars. Still, he was given an incredible sum, and he had enough to make himself comfortable. Yeah. And he hoarded it and he buried it in the ground, rather than extending those blessings to other people to impact the lives of others, which takes risk. It takes vulnerability. It takes intentionality. And I think too often we miss all those things. And when I say comfort, somebody's like, well, my life isn't comfortable. But that's why we're stuck. We choose to stay in the rut that we're in because it's familiar. It may not be comfortable, but it's at least familiar. And it becomes sort of a comfort zone, even if you're like, I don't like this about me, I don't like my job, I don't like this. But if you don't do anything to change it, then it is a sense of learned helplessness where you are choosing some sort of a comfort zone to remain in. I try to remind people and myself all the time. We talk about, this so-and-so, like Rob, he's really in a groove, man. He's got this podcast, he's crushing all these different things. The only difference between being in a groove or stuck in a rut is how long you stay there. And if we're not growing, if we're not being stretched, because growth does not happen inside a comfort zone. Sanctification, that's the idea of God molding us and shaping us into who he wants us to be. That doesn't happen without difficulty and stress and frustration.
Absolutely. So, and taking our faith and connecting that to finances, how in your life does your faith help guide your financial decision making?
Well, it goes back to the stewardship principle. I believe one of the big things that we are stewards over is our money. And the Bible talks a lot about that. I mean, Proverbs is full of it. And Jesus talked, a lot of his parables revolve around money, because when the Bible was inspired, God knew that money would be a very emotional topic for us. And there's a verse in Luke that says, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And some people believe that our treasure, it shows where our heart is, but the verse actually says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It is kind of a little bit of chicken or the egg, Rob, but what that verse is saying is, where you place your treasure, your emphasis, what you cling to in life, your heart will be drawn to that thing. So where you place your treasure, where you spend your money and your time, does that show you where your heart is? It can, and I believe that to be true. But we have to look at the flip side, where we place our emphasis, our effort, what we cling to, what we draw our money towards. Our heart will be drawn to those things. And that's why the previous verses talk about building up treasure, building up moments in eternity, because that's what matters, and God wanting our hearts to be drawn to those things. So money can be a wonderful tool. I tell people, money is a great servant, but it's a terrible master. And I believe if we are not intentional with telling our money what to do, it does end up controlling us. It consumes us. And that's why the Bible says so much about it. And I believe that if we can become good stewards of our money, stewardship and a lot of other areas fall into place, because money is such a big part of our life. It's such an important part of even our psychological well-being, that my point there is just like, the scarcity mindset and things like that. I mean, if you're worried about money, it affects many other areas of your life. That anxiety doesn't just stay in the money part of your life. So when we start being a better manager of our finances, and we have discipline and we have confidence in that area, it's amazing to see how that discipline and confidence has a ripple and effect into many, many other areas of our life, especially in relationships.
Absolutely. Can you give me a practical example for you, what those treasures are for you?
For me, it's my family. And a lot of people say that. I have 6 kids, and we've got 16 down to 4, and I look every single day. I look forward to going home to them. Now, there are some days where I also look forward to them going to bed, but
probably in the same day sometimes.
Sometimes in the same day, yeah. But I have a daughter that works with me. I mean, my kids are absolutely delightful, and it's been a blessing and honor to raise them. We're not trying to raise good kids. We're trying to raise good adults, though, and that's another area of stewardship. The relationships we have, especially for our kids and for you grandparents out there, your grandkids. That's a huge stewardship opportunity. But also, I want my kids, I want us to all be on a mission together, Rob. And this is this idea of stewardship in serving, and for us to be connected, working together to serve others around us. And with a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, like, they're not going to have a huge ministry on their own, but those are the things that I'm trying to develop. And that's what's really important, is for people to look at the Hufford family and say, our lives are better. They're encouraged. We've been uplifted because we know these folks. So hospitality is a big part of that. God has blessed us with the ability to be hospitable and to reach others in that way. It's really a gift that my wife has. It's a struggle for me. I'm an introvert, but using our family as a way to serve our local community is just it's kind of even how or why I developed my business the way I did, so it wouldn't disrupt my work-life balance. So I wanted to have a business that I owned and not a job that owned me. And God has really blessed those desires, and what we've been able to do as a family. And again, we're still young, we're still growing, we're still figuring out, but that is the absolute joy in my life, is the connection with my family and being able to impact the lives of those around us as a family.
That's so good. And, I love these kind of conversations, because we need to hear these kind of conversations, this kind of stuff around, because you're handling $500 million in assets. Like, that's what Veritas is all about, what you guys do. But to hear, like, because we get a misconception of wealth, we get a misconception of money, and it's attached to, like, evil, or attached to people hoarding it, or just wasting it, or abusing power with it, and all these sorts of things. So we need to have that conversation just wiped clean, and to start from the ground up. Like in the Bible, the men of God in the Bible were wealthy, and it's mentioned many times in the Old Testament. The people that God chose, they were wealthy. And also, that's one important part of this. But the Bible also, I think the second most mentioned word in the Bible is money, I believe. It's like one of the biggest topics throughout the entire Bible. It's mentioned so many times. And so clearly God was trying to give us a message of, like, this is something important to pay attention to, but not with fear, right? With love, and with joy, and with the power of God. And we have to, and I know for me personally, spend time, like going back to the beginning of this, being grateful for the things we have in our lives, and building that healthy relationship towards money in our lives. Because if we don't do that, we're going to run into a lot of obstacles.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, some of the men in the Bible and women were very wealthy, and the wealthiest of them was Solomon. And in Chronicles, I believe it's Chronicles 29, Solomon proclaims to the nation, I believe they were getting ready to consecrate the temple. But he says, everything in the heavens and earth is yours, O Lord, and this is your kingdom. And he says, to men, you have given power and might and wealth. And it's acknowledgement. He was probably the wealthiest man in the world at that time. Some people think he might be the wealthiest person ever. There's different ways to measure wealth. Point is, the dude had a lot. But his acknowledgement that, God, everything comes from you, and everything I have is only because you have entrusted me. Like, that's a very important mindset to have, because the other way, the flip side of that is the warning that the Israelites get when they're entering the promised land. Moses warns them, you're going to be sipping water from wells you didn't dig. You're going to be eating grapes from vineyards you didn't plant. You're going to be living in houses and cities you didn't build. And you're going to start getting fat and comfortable and complacent, and start thinking, oh, it is my hand that did this. I'm the one who created this. So Solomon, one of the richest men that ever lived, was reminding himself and the people around him, God, everything is coming from you. You are the source of everything wonderful and all the blessings in my life. And I think that acknowledgement is really important to keep us humble, but also to raise that standard that this is coming from God. This is God's wealth that I have been asked to steward. I've got to take this seriously.
Yeah. So true. So important. Such a great message to hear, man. And as we're wrapping this thing up, I want to invite people to check out what you're doing. So you have a a platform on your website to help people find their financial target. If they go to veritasalaska.com/find your number, what can they expect when they go there?
Well, it's hard to hit a target you can't see. And there's a world of difference between somebody who is just collecting investments over the next 30 years and somebody who is strategically building towards long-term objectives that are meaningful and important. So what this tool does, Rob, is it helps people create a target for financial independence and what they need personally based on their goals and their own lifestyle. And it creates a sense of intentionality and it gives them a starting point. Because I do believe that money is just a tool. Anytime money becomes the sole objective or it becomes the goal in and of itself, we're on a dangerous path. But money is a tool that can allow you to be independent, allow you to be more generous, to be a blessing to others. And while we don't want it to be the objective, we do want to have some measurable and meaningful goals around it so we can start building that in a meaningful and intentional way.
Amen. I love that. Find your financial target, veritasalaska.com/find your number. And like I said earlier, if you want to launch your own platform, be the authority in your space, I'd love to help you to kick off that podcast. Check out the Pro Podcaster Academy at robzwentz.com. Chad, this has been an incredible conversation. I greatly appreciate you and the work that you do and the work that you've done. Anything you want to leave the audience with before we sign off?
I just want to remind people that you are the biggest variable in your life, your behavior, your choices. We talked about this idea of stewardship, but you know, the whole idea of getting unstuck. Like, it may not be your fault why you are where you are today, the things you're struggling with. Maybe it is, but it is your responsibility to grow from that. It may not be your fault that you find yourself flat on the floor, but it is your responsibility to stand up. And your choices, your behaviors, your habits are going to be the biggest determining factors in how your trajectory, how your life plays out. And I believe God has given each one of us an opportunity to make a huge impact in this world, to leave a dent in the world around us. And just please take that opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. Take the opportunity, because we all have that opportunity. It's all right in front of us. So wherever you're at in life, remember the breakthrough is possible. And I always like to think too, if you're going through a breakdown, it means the breakthrough's coming. So keep going. Don't stop in that breakdown. Great conversation, man. Love talking to you. Another true testimony of breakthrough. Until next time, this has been the Unstuck Movement.